Okay, welcome again and good afternoon. My name is Amy and I'm the Public Programs Manager at the museum. If you haven't been to the museum, it's a really cool place that's worth the visit. We are in downtown Brooklyn in a decommissioned I&D subway station. And we recently just added another day to our schedule. So we're open Wednesday to Sunday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. We also have a gallery and shop in Grand Central Terminal that just opened this week, our beloved holiday train show, which is free. So please go check it out. We have a couple upcoming programs that you might be interested in if you are in New York. We also have another virtual program if you are not. And we are bringing back some transit museum favorites like Subway Swing, which is going to happen next Friday, November 22nd. It's a night of jazz bands and vintage clothing. And we're also bringing back transit trivia on December 12th. Tickets are available on our website. That free virtual program is December 19th, and it's with Polly Desjardins, our content manager, who's going to be mining the archives. And generally, the best way to stay up to date with our programs is to subscribe to our newsletter. So for today's program, if you like captions, you can click show captions at the bottom of your screen or via the three dots. Also, there's a new Zoom update that if you have your cursor on your Zoom screen, the menu pops up and covers the bottom of the PowerPoint. So we recommend that you keep your cursor to the side of your Zoom window. Also, per usual, we'll leave time for questions for all of today's speakers at the end of the program, but feel free to add them to the chat during the presentation and I will share them out. Okay, so now on to today's program, which is incredibly unique. In one Zoom room, we have representatives of three major public art institutions in the city. They all intersect at one of New York City's largest mass transit complexes, Penn Station, and their programs cross physically in this space, but they cross in many other ways too. There's many stakeholders involved in these projects. There's many artists that work across projects, and there's a lot of themes that cross these projects too. Cheryl Hageman is Deputy Director of MTA Arts and Design, responsible for commissioning new projects and maintaining the permanent art collection throughout the MTA system. She is co-author of the book Contemporary Art Underground, published in 2024 with Monticelli Press. She has applied an in-depth knowledge of materials and fabrication to produce and care for award-winning artworks during her 2 decades as an arts administrator. Sharon Tepper serves as director of both Art at Amtrak and Infrastructure Planning Gateway Program at Amtrak. She launched Art at Amtrak, Amtrak's official public art program, in 2022 at New York Penn Station and has since expanded it to other Amtrak stations and properties along the Northeast Corridor and National Network. Prior to Amtrak, Sharon had over 13 years of experience working in New York City and Newark's economic development, urban planning, and transportation worlds. Melanie Kress is a curator and writer who joined Public Art Fund as senior curator in 2023. Previously, she was the curator of Highline Art, the public art program presented on and around the High Line in New York. She has commissioned and produced projects with hundreds of artists, and in 2010, she co-founded the Brooklyn-based project space Concrete Utopia, of which she was director and chief curator. She is also a critic at Yale School of Art. So please join me in welcoming all of our speakers today. It's a wonderful lineup. And now I'll hand it over to our first speaker, Cheryl.
Hello. Thank you so much, Amy. It's really wonderful to be here today with Sharon and Melanie and all of you looking at our collective efforts to enliven Penn with art. As Amy mentioned, but I think it bears repeating, particularly if we have a lot of members of the audience who are joining from outside New York, that MTA Arts and Design is the program that presents visual and performing arts throughout the MTA system. So that includes subways, Metro North, and Long Island Railroad. And over the past nearly 40 years, Arts and Design has commissioned more than 400 permanent artworks. Next slide, please. Thank you. Whoops. You see here a selection of the artworks that we have at Penn Station. Typically, we engage one artist to produce one artwork per location. This helps to give each station a unique identity. However, complexes that serve multiple lines often have multiple artworks. So Penn Station, like Grand Central and Times Square and a few other locations, includes several artworks commissioned by Arts and Design. And at Penn, we have permanent artworks by 4 artists on view, installed over a 30-year period. I'll share a bit about each of them today, focusing mainly on the newest and oldest pieces by Andrew Lester and Diane Al-Hadid, which speak directly to the history of Penn Station. Next. 3 of the 4 artists have multiple works at Penn, which is also unusual. Ceramicist Elizabeth Grajales was first commissioned for A Bird's Life, the 24 handmade tiles that can be seen along the platforms of the one train. And the following year, she added When Animals Speak, a mosaic mural on the center platform of the 2-3 trains. And we'll be talking about the themes of these artworks today. And in both of Elizabeth's works, she presents an idealized depiction of animals and the natural world. The imagery, color palette, and materials she chose were all intended to bring a sense of calm into the bustling subway station. Next. Meanwhile, Eric Fischel seems to embrace the chaos of Penn in his mosaic, The Garden of Circus Delights. Installed in the ACE passage, the artwork pays homage to the circus, which was once an annual tradition at Madison Square Garden. Many families, including the artist when he was a child, would travel from the suburbs via Long Island Railroad to the city to see the circus. Next. That memory inspired the work, along with the idea of the daily commuter. The artist drew additional inspiration from Dante's Inferno. Next. The narrative mural takes a dark but humorous tone as it turns commuting into a spiritual quest, meeting fire breathers, acrobats, and animals along the way. Next. Andrew Lester's Ghost series is a much more direct reference to Penn Station. Glazed terracotta bas-relief murals feature recreations of architectural remnants from the original Pennsylvania Station building. Ghost series takes us back in time. Next. In 1910, the original Pennsylvania Station was built and named for its original occupant, the Pennsylvania Railroad. The building's demolition, begun in 1963, famously sparked the city's landscapes preservation movement. I really like historic photos, so I tucked in a few. I hope that appeals to people. Those of you who are familiar with classical Greek architecture might recognize these exterior columns from structures like the Acropolis. Next. Not the columns that we see in Andrew's artwork. Corinthian column, which we see here, next, was part of the main waiting room. And although I can't say for certain, as I was looking at these pictures in preparation for this talk, I realized something new. I think that Andrew Lester's artwork is perhaps true to scale. So that's something I'm going to have to talk to him about. But next slide, please. For 25 years, Corinthian column, which we see here in a photo that's about 10 years old, faced a companion piece titled Column Plinth, which was on the opposite side of this passage, that showed the lower half of the column. And while we do intend for artwork to be permanent when we commission it, we also recognize that stations need to evolve to meet the needs of riders, which can mean changes to the architecture. And a couple of years ago, during some very impressive station improvements, sadly, column plinth had to be removed and placed in storage. However, along with those improvements came several that benefited the art, including increased ceiling height, more complementary finishes, and notably better lighting. Next. And in the background of this photo from 2018, not that long ago, Day and Night, another work from Andrew Lester's Ghost series, Day and Night are barely visible. Next. Day and night, for those who don't recognize them, are the historic clock figures that were carved by Adolf Alexander Weinman for the 1910 building. They stood on the outside at the roof line on the center of each face of original Penn Station. Next. And during the demolition, much of the structure was carried away to landfill in New Jersey. And in a way, they sort of became icons for that loss. So here we see segments of the historic clock figures making that journey. And the image on the far right is from the New York Times documenting day in landfill. Next. So through his work, the artist keeps their memory alive in this recreation, which is now visible thanks to the new lighting. We can really appreciate the details and see day on the left with eyes open, holding sunflowers, and night, eyes closed, holding poppies. And I was really looking closely at this piece, thinking about what I wanted to share with you. And I really can't tell whether the hourglass at the top is full or empty, but I feel that time is suspended in this work, and in the dark circle that exists in place of where the clock was that we saw in that previous historic image, you can just make out the demolition date, October 28th, 1963, if you can see it there in the very center. Next. And the last artist that we'll look at is Diana El-Hadid. Two mosaics by Diana were added to the station in 2018, and a third more recently. And I think of these works as kindred spirits to the Ghost series Terracottas nearby. Like Andrew Lester, Diana studied historic photos and did research, which is a typical part of her practice. The arches of Old Penn Station, which is the image that we see here, uses the artist's gestural line work to depict the inner framework and grandeur of the 1910 building. Next. We can see clearly in her work the lines of the steel trusses and columns. Next. And so quickly, I'll just share a little behind the scenes glimpse. The image on the left shows Diana working on the original artwork for this piece in her studio. She made a large scale work in Conte, charcoal, pastel, and acrylic on mylar. Next. Diana chose to work with Meyer of Munich to translate her artwork into mosaic. It's a standard practice for the artists that we commission to work with a fabricator to realize their vision in the durable material that's been specified by the MTA. This is a collaborative process, and for Diana's mosaic, Meyer captures her long acrylic drips in these slender slivers of glass that you can see both lying on the table in the left and also in the detail on the right. Next. Oh, this is just another image of the installed work. Next. The second mosaic, the Ark of Godiva, features a mythological character that was popularized in literature at the turn of the 20th century, around the same time original Penn was built. Godiva became a subject of interest to Freud and post-structuralists. And in this mural, we witness her ability to walk through walls. Her flowing garment stretches the length of the mosaic. Next. And most recently, in 2023, a third mosaic was added in a new set of stairs visible from the new street-level plaza at 7th Avenue and 33rd Street. Diana's trilogy of works relate to the concept of time through subject matter and expressive mark-making. Next. The time-telling brings us back to the clock from the original McKim, Mead, and White station. This piece was inspired by Alfred Eisenstadt's famous photograph, Farewell to Serviceman, Pennsylvania Station, New York City, 1943. And like the photo that we see on the left, Diana's work, which is the original artwork we're seeing on the right, captures a moment in time and freezes it. But unlike the definition seen in the photo, Diana's speckles of shimmering fog and drips really blur that line between people and place. Next. Diana worked with Meyer to fabricate all three of the mosaics at Penn. And lastly, we see just a full-scale installation shot on the right. Oh, next. And that's the end of my portion. Before I turn it over to Sharon Tupper from Amtrak, I just want to say thanks again for this opportunity to share this work with you. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that you can learn more stories about the artworks and how they're made in the new book, Contemporary Art Underground, that's available online and at the Transit Museum. So I hope that you will check it out and also stay connected with arts and design through social media. We put all of our open calls on our website, and a relatively new feature for us is that we've become part of the Bloomberg Connects app. So you can now download that and have an interactive guide to the 400 works in our system on your phone every day as you travel the system, or just learn more about it from wherever you are. Right. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to turn it over to Sharon Tupper from Art on Amtrak now.
Thanks so much, Cheryl. Hi, I'm Sharon Tepper. I'm Director of the Art at Amtrak program here at Amtrak, and also Director of Infrastructure Planning with our Gateway program here. Art at Amtrak is the official public art program of Amtrak, and I'm just really excited to get to share it with you today. Next slide, please. I'm going to just go through the origins of the program and really take you through, not go terribly in depth into each of the installations, but because it's a rotating program, to show you everything that we've installed at Penn Station and a few pieces at other locations as well today. And I'll also just share a few examples of how we've expanded the program to the Northeast Corridor International Network. Next slide, please. So Art at Amtrak, the mission of this program is to present diverse, unique, and memorable art projects to enhance, invigorate, and humanize the travel experience at Amtrak stations. And it really is meant to reflect and celebrate each region's creative preeminence, featuring contemporary artists through rotating exhibitions. So the artists that we feature are local to each region that each of our stations serve. That's our curatorial approach. And we work with a curator, a Deborah Simon Art Consulting, to reach these artists at each of our stations. And Deborah, as curator, really understands the unique challenge of finding work that can scale to these massive public spaces in our station. Also, we have an advisory committee at each location. In New York City, it's made up of leaders in the arts and culture and curatorial communities. So our program launched at Penn Station in June of 2022. As I mentioned, it's expanded to other locations, including Moynihan Train Hall, Washington Union Station, William H. Gray III 30th Street Station in Philadelphia, and Chicago Union Station. So I'll walk you through the history, and I'll share these installations that we've been able to bring to the Penn Station complex in New York. You can change the next slide, please. So the program origins. Amtrak moved our primary passenger-facing facility to beautiful Moynihan Train Hall on January 1st in 2021, the middle of the pandemic. And it's an incredible, majestic, light-filled, inspiring space. And we have some permanent installations here curated by the Public Art Fund that you'll hear more about from Melanie right after my presentation. Next slide, please. However, Moynihan is really part of what's a larger Penn Station complex. So what I'm showing you here is a cross-section, west to east, of the entire Penn complex. So what you can see at the bottom of this image here is that the trains run under both. So passengers use both Moynihan Train Hall and Penn Station, which is in blue on the right-hand side, to access platforms in their trains. So it's really important to Amtrak to really improve the larger concourse space and passenger experience. Amtrak owns Penn Station, everything below grade on the right, and it's a really important place to Amtrak. It's our busiest. It is responsible for 2 out of every 3 trips on the Northeast Corridor. They either start or end here in New York, and actually 1 out of every 3 Amtrak trips nationwide either start or end here in New York. So really significant for Amtrak passengers. Also, before the pandemic, the complex saw over 600,000 people pass through it a day. About 90% of those were commuters coming through New Jersey Transit or the MTA, and the other 10% were Amtrak passengers. And we are working on longer-term, large-scale improvement plans with our railroad partners, New Jersey Transit and the MTA, for Penn Station. But in the meanwhile, Art at Amtrak is really meant to be kind of an interim improvement before this larger scale work. So as I mentioned, we own the space. We take our stewardship of the space seriously. We define it as a civic space, this station. And particularly when we started this program in 2022, after the pandemic, we're really looking for reasons to bring the public back into the station, to bring passengers back in, commuting back into New York City. And so with this program of rotating installations, we've really given people a reason to come back and discover something new each time. And this program has also seen about 6 cycles since we began it in 2022, and I will take you through it through this presentation. Next slide, please. So these are the before shots. So we looked for spaces. Where can we make improvements? Where can we introduce art here in the station? And we identified a few possibilities here. The first is the departure concourse, the former Amtrak main boarding concourse at Penn Station. Next slide, please. And the second is the rotunda, which is actually that main waiting space geographically that Cheryl shared with you before. Next slide, please. Next slide. I'll take you through some of the installations. So yes, behind the scenes shot. This is at night when everyone's gone from the station mostly. This is the shot of us putting up the first installation in the rotunda. Next slide, please. And I'll start in 2022 and run through all of the many different artists and installations we've had. Here's Saya Wolfbach's work in the rotunda. And I'll just pause here and note that I think as Cheryl showed, a lot of the art kind of celebrated the commuters, that the permanent installations that the MTA has, and the history of the original Penn Station. A lot of the artists that we brought in, a lot of these contemporary artists, were looking to bring in things that maybe Penn didn't have, like nature and light. So you'll see some of these themes going through, and also celebrating very much the humanity that passes through the station each day. Next slide, please. And this is Dalia El Said's work in the first installation on the departure concourse. And one of the things we did was really clear out a lot of older signage and other sort of confusing things around the concourse. And really, by installing this art in this departure concourse, we've really united the space as one, as like a true urban room. Next slide, please. The next installation is Dennis Redmond Darkeem's work here in the rotunda. Next slide. And Ghost of a Dream's work in the departure concourse, again trying to bring in the sunrise, images of the sunrise from around the world into Penn Station, which is known by many as the center of the world. Next slide, please. Garrick Adams was the first artist who we had take over both spaces, the rotunda and the departure concourse. Next slide. With The City is My Refuge, and here's Derek's work in the departure concourse. Next slide. David Rios Ferreira, Get Carried Away, You Have the Right, his work in the Penn Station Rotunda, a fan favorite. Next slide. And Shoshana Weinberger, whose work is also up in Newark Airport. Here she is also referring to the passage of time with the stripes alternating with sort of a muse, a representation of her own body on the columns here. Again, really uniting the space on the departure concourse. Next slide. Rico Gaston had a complete takeover also of the entire upper level rotunda and the departure concourse. Next slide. Chitra Ganesha's work, which was just installed this past summer, so you all can come out and see it. She also had work up at Moynihan, which I'll show you later as well. Next slide. And the other current work up is by Irini Linardaki, whose work was put up on sort of temporary construction barricades and has really fulfilled this dream that we've had to really highlight and celebrate the people who make Penn Station work day in and day out, and who are really so proud to see their images up on the wall. As you can see some of our Amtrak employees on the left here. Next slide, please. And I wanted to just show you just a smattering of our installations at Moynihan Train Hall. As our installations at Penn are rotating, so are those at Moynihan Train Hall. We've had the opportunity to partner with Empire State Development Corporation on digital installations. And next slide, please. First, I'll show you a permanent installation by Karen Margolis, which is up in our first class lounge at Moynihan Train Hall. This piece actually is composed of paper that is manipulated, and they're mostly maps of places around the country that Amtrak actually serves. So it's really brought a lot of life and energy into this gorgeous lounge. Next slide, please. And I'm going to show you just a few examples of the rotating digital works up on the 4 massive screens at Moynihan Train Hall that we partnered with Empire State Development to install, who owns those screens. This is Josh Frankel's work. Josh's grandfather actually worked at the post office, as this Moynihan Train Hall used to be the primary mail sorting facility for New York City. Next slide, please. Another installation by Shazia Sikandar, Singing Suns, again, trying to bring that light, that energy, that outside into the station space. Next slide. And another example, William Kentridge's We Will Make Shoes from the Sky here. Next slide, please. There are a few other, we've had other artists also at Moynihan Train Hall, including Tin and Ed. The woman, the artist whose work is currently up on the Moynihan screens is Alison Maria Rodriguez, A Human Glimpse of Time. Derek Adams also had work up there, and other artists as well. One other example of another space in New York City I wanted to show you, you might not know about, is next slide. This is a property that Amtrak owns. It's the site of the future tunnel vent shaft for the future Hudson River Tunnel, otherwise known as the Gateway Tunnel. It is a massive property on 12th Avenue and 30th Street. And so we commissioned work from Marissa Moran-John to create a fence wrap that really celebrates the water, the Hudson River, the history, and the connection that this site has to the natural environment here. Next slide, please. And I just didn't want to leave you without showing you a few other Amtrak stations around our network where we've gotten the opportunity to expand. Next slide. Here is the current installation at Washington Union Station by Nikisha Durrett. Next slide. Chicago Union Station, we've just installed art by 3 local artists here at Chicago Union Station. Next slide. And in Philadelphia, William H. Gray, the 30th Street Station, where we've been fortunate enough to actually support a performance, which we also did in Washington Union Station. Next slide, please. And I just want to thank you for your time, and I'd like to hand it over to Melanie from the Public Art Fund.
Hi, everyone. Happy Friday. It's so exciting to see so many folks joining us for this talk. Thank you, Cheryl and Sharon. It's incredible to see so many synergies and artists in common. And of course, to Amy from New York Transit Museum and Hillary and Katie behind the scenes. for hosting us. So thank you for the introduction. My name is Melanie Kress. I'm the Senior Curator for Public Art Fund. Today, I'm so glad to share with you the permanent art commissions by a number of renowned artists that Public Art Fund realized with Empire State Development for Moynihan Train Hall. And I'm going to focus on the virtuosic photographic panels created by Stan Douglas that we've seen in a couple of the artworks already shared, focus on some of the important shared moments of the history of the original Penn Station. So I'll go into further detail on these projects, but first want to share a little bit more background about Public Art Fund and some of my own touchstones, both as a curator and really also as a member of the public who believes deeply in public art, in order to give some background and context for how this work fits into a larger picture. And just for a little bit of context, as we look at Moynihan, I've been thrilled to be with Public Art Fund for just over 1 year. And so I was able to watch these projects come to life as an admirer of the program and as a neighbor and someone who was using that space at the time, working as a curator at the High Line. And so I would be remiss if I didn't express my incredible gratitude now as a colleague, but also as a New Yorker for the incredible work of the Public Art Fund team and Empire State Development, as well as my colleagues here today in bringing these works and of course this incredible building to life, which is a gift to all of us. Next slide. So to step back for a moment on some background on Public Art Fund, since 1997, we've played a crucial role in expanding our understanding of what public art can be and the importance that it can have in our daily lives. That pioneering work has helped to shape cities all over the world, and we now see public art incorporated naturally into every kind of urban experience. The city, as we all know, is really a platform for artists, not only within museums and galleries, but also in here, transportation hubs, streets, parks, and plazas, in a way that just brings incredible engagement and vitality. We were founded by the brilliant Doris C. Friedman, who was a champion of artists and the role that art plays in the everyday life of the city, which again, we see in each of these conversations. She served as New York City's first director of cultural affairs, president of the Municipal Art Society of New York, and was a tireless advocate for public art and cultural access. I mentioned these few examples: New York City's Percent for Art program, legalization of artist residences in Soho, and importantly for this conversation, for garnering public support to save Grand Central Station from demolition. Next slide. So expanding on Doris's original vision, our work at Moynihan Train Hall, next slide, is part of a larger Public Art Fund initiative called Creative Partnerships, which is a team here that brings our 50 years of expertise to bring permanent and temporary commissions to cultural institutions, civic centers, and transit hubs, as you can see here, such as LaGuardia Airport's Terminal B and Newark Terminal A. Art brings visitors from around the world, as we can see even just in the folks who are attending today, to New York City, and we are so glad to see how increasingly our transit hubs reflect the awe-inspiring creativity that fuels the city's rich cultural life and makes it a global destination. Next slide. Cheryl, I am also a fan of historical photographs, as you can see here. And so as a public art curator, and recently, as a teacher, when I think about the broad possibilities for public art in our cities and our transit hubs today, I often return to the WPA or the Works Progress Administration as a model or forebear in the US of the ways that art can become integrated in big ways into all of our daily lives. And to remember that we continue to build on these historical commitments. As an introduction, the WPA was an agency, many will know, under the President Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, a series of programs, public work projects, and regulations in the early to mid-30s that had the intention of rescuing the US from the Great Depression. And the WPA's Federal Art Project did an incredible amount of work to establish more than 100 community art centers throughout the country, researched and documented American design, sustained some 10,000 artists and craft workers during the Great Depression, and importantly, commissioned a significant body of public art. And so what you see here is one of the many great projects that existed nearby. Armenian-American painter Arshil Gorky working on his WPA commissioned murals for Newark Airport that were on view from 1937 to 1942, and a few of which were rescued to eventually be placed on view at the Newark Museum of Art. And it's incredible to me to imagine how each chapter of these commitments to public art layer on top of one another to bring the vibrancy of all these projects into so many of the public spaces that we experience today, and the work that Public Art Fund is able to realize in train station, airports, and other civic gathering spaces. We will skip the next slide for time because I know I can be vociferous and move on to the next one. So for Moynihan Train Hall, Public Art Fund was invited by Empire State Development to develop and direct a program of ambitious art installations. Stan Douglas's piece you see here, which I'll get to in a moment, for 3 prominent sites within the train hall. In keeping with the redesigned building's architectural integration of old and new, the art program commissioned 3 of the world's leading artists to create large-scale, site-specific artworks that reflect broadly on notions of past, present, and future. And I really appreciate the guiding question for this project, which was, what makes a public building a truly civic space, able to evoke a sense of shared ownership and collective pride? These remarkable artworks capture and express a spirit of democratic purpose, historical memory, and innovative design that characterizes this new centerpiece that we've been seeing for the last number of minutes of New York's essential urban infrastructure. So as we see here, Stan Douglas has mined the history of the original Penn Station, giving heroic pictorial life to narratives from different moments in time using today's most advanced digital technologies. To introduce the artist since the late 1980s, Stan has used photography, film, and theater to reconsider history and the means of its documentation, which define its shape and our collective memory. Born of exhaustive historical research, his artworks bring new focus to overlooked events specific to a particular location. He frequently hones in on intimate, localized moments of spectacle and poignancy that speak to broader societal shifts. So again, as we all know now, from 1910 to 1963, the original Pennsylvania station stood 1 block east of Moynihan Train Hall, and the demolition of the Grand Beaux-Arts building designed by eminent American architects McKim, Mead, and White is now considered an incomparable loss to the Gilded Age architecture and urban landscape of New York. And again, it's amazing here to see those connections to Andrew Lester's piece and Diana Al-Hadid's historical research. And what we'll see further as we dive in is this kind of suspension in time that Douglas was interested in that's also coming out in these other artworks. And so I think it's fascinating, just kind of an aside, to think about the suspension of time in a place like a transit hub where all you're thinking about is movement and change. So how to hold a moment of pause within that. So from a technical side, which is really fascinating, in order to recreate both the demolished building in these photographs that you see here, Douglas undertook extensive archival research. So he extrapolated from photographs, he looked at thousands and then narrowed down to hundreds of newspaper articles, architectural plans, and he restaged each one of the historical events that he found by posing and photographing live performers in period costume. And so if you look at these photographs that we've been seeing from the previous presentations and from Douglas's here, what he did was he went to the hockey stadium in Vancouver, and meanwhile, this was all taking place during the pandemic, and used that as the largest space possible to be able to recreate the vastness of the original Penn Station. But even that, Stan says, and had said in his artist talk, wasn't quite large enough to be able to recreate that space. And so there are a lot of technical ways that he was able to recreate it. And so what you see behind is actually a CGI animation of the original space that then has stitched into it dozens of exposures of these people in period costume to create each tableau into the faithfully reproduced soaring ceilings and stately concourses of the original station. He selected events that chronicled the breadth of collective experience for which Penn Station served as a stage. And again, I love imagining all of us as performers standing on the stage of these important civic locations. And so with a cinematic quality, each scene revives history in uncanny detail, revealing this architectural landmark as a grand theater for millions of human dramas. The artist described his experience conceiving the project almost like a memory of a place I'd never been to, having originally seen it in the movies. And what's so interesting there again is that the technologies that he's using are not only these incredibly advanced CGI technologies to recreate the backgrounds and the space of the architecture, but also essentially staging a Hollywood movie set inside of this hockey stadium to be able to make these 9 images. And so not only the CGI, but also the technology of cinema as a way to make photographs. And so we can walk through a few of these images. The ones that we've been seeing here, the one on the left references the time when during World War II, Penn Station was the primary arrival and departure point for deployed soldiers, and thus a site for joyous reunifications and heartrending goodbyes. While on the right, again, thinking about these Hollywood technologies, he arranges a soundstage from the 1945 film The Clock by director Vincente Minnelli. And the popular film showed a soldier discovering New York City and finding love the day before his deployment to war, showing in a way the artifice that he realizes for his own creations to make these few images. Next slide. This one, for some reason, sings to my heart. In 1924, Celia Cooney, famously known as the bobbed hair bandit, I'm not robbing banks, I promise, but she seems like she was a really fascinating person, became a folk hero after evading arrest following a series of brazen robberies with her husband. Alternatively characterized by the press as a working class hero or a corrupted libertine, the sensationalized Cooney was finally apprehended in Florida and returned to New York City. And so what we see here is the moment of her arrival back to New York and Penn Station. And what Douglas did was he restaged what the Evening Post called an unruly throng jammed at the Penn Station platform. She smiled broadly to the newspaper photographers and winked as a battery of flashlights exploded. And then on the right, Angelo Herndon, celebrated labor organizer, gave a series of speeches in New York City during his release on jail on bail from a Georgia prison. And he'd been charged with organizing a peaceful interracial demonstration of unemployed workers in Atlanta. So here we see the Communist Party members and supporters gathered in the thousands to hail him and his return home and his cause for social justice and workers' rights. In the next slide, we can see the way that these images are integrated into the architecture of the building. These moments. So this is the waiting room now at Moynihan Train Hall. So the waiting hall then translated through these images, and you can see, folks, the scale of the works as they relate to passersby. Next slide. In these three images, we can see the marks of history passing. The scenes unfold over 3 decades, each shown in the early morning of June 20th. June 20th across 3 decades, the summer solstice as the sun pours into the waiting room and passengers trickle into the grand space. On the left, the new trimotor airplane was taken apart and reassembled to fit into the hall, christened by Amelia Earhart at its unveiling. The airplane presaged the increased popularity and efficiency of air travel over the country, and consequently the dwindling demand for long distance travel. In the middle, we see the importance of railroads as vital to a war effort, as monumental poster portraits of essential train workers are shown, a conductor, engineer, sailor, and more. And then on the right, in the latest one, the 1956 clamshell design for the futuristic electric ticket sales and service bureau, one of the dramatic mid-century attempts to keep pace with modernity, as air and automobile travel eclipsed rail as America's primary modes of transportation. Next slide. And again, I feel like I've said that multiple of these are my favorites. Again, a favorite. These two images here tell the story of March 1st and 2nd, 1914, when vaudeville performers from across the eastern seaboard were stranded in Penn Station during an epic snowstorm. I grew up in Boston. I know these epic snowstorms that brought rail traffic to a halt. Burt Williams, the legendary singer, comedian, and first African-American to direct a motion picture, recognized the talent in the room and instigated an impromptu vaudeville show to the delight of his fellow travelers. And so, especially on the left, you can see how Douglas reproduced this serendipitous moment where acrobats transform the cavernous waiting room into a theater in the round, and musical numbers turned its staircase into a stage. I'm really, truly in awe of the ways that Douglas is able to bring this immense amount of history and humanity into 9 elegant images. And to me, they're really more than photographs. In fact, literally, they are ceramic ink prints on glass, which is amazing to think about all the different kinds of materials that we're looking at across these presentations, of how we're able to bring artworks into these spaces in a permanent and an ongoing way. But these are stories that unfold as your eye necessarily passes in time across the glass from each wildly detailed vignette or scene to the next. And when there's a really great, I highly recommend talk that we recorded with Stan a number of years ago that's on the Public Art Fund website. And when he shares the photographs, he actually has to make a video that zooms from each character a vignette to the next. And so in a way, there are these still photographs that are holding a moment in time, but they're also in constant motion because of the way that you read them and the stories unfold as you become a part of the image. And then I'll say quickly, as I know I'm running low on time, we also have 2 very different installations located in the mid-block entrances to the building. Next slide. On the ceilings of those locations, on the left by Elms Green and Dragset, and on the right by Cahinda Wiley. So on the left, you can see a dreamed up global metropolis that came into sculptural being, upside down, radiating the city's irresistible urban energy. And the artists combined miniaturized skyscrapers of their own invention with iconic high-rise buildings from megacities around the world, distilling these towers into their most essential forms. And on the right, using illuminated stained glass and inspired by classical frescoed ceilings, Kahinda Wiley adapted the movements of breakdance, a form originated in the Bronx, into a lyrical allegory of dynamic human expression. And if we jump forward quickly 3 slides, I always like to share, next slide, an image of the behind the scenes showing just a small fraction of what it takes to bring these artworks and installations to life. Of course, there are countless variables to consider when building a complex new transit hub, and art is just one of them. And it takes, so when we're bringing an artwork to life, we're working not only with an artist making a painting, but also fabricators, artisans, engineers, installation teams, to make sure that each element of these incredibly complex projects are both in service of the general public using the space and of the artist's vision that's so special to all of us. And, you know, I wax poetical often on this point, but I really believe genuinely in the democratization of art that is essentially about access, not only in terms of the location of an artwork in a site like these transit hubs outside of a museum or a gallery space, but also about the expansive network and family of people who come together to bring something like this into reality, and together are able to take a collective ownership of its success. And so, you know, there are hundreds of people that make these projects happen, and they're really essential not only to the individual projects, but thinking about this expansion of art and continued importance of art in the public realm. And so very quickly as I close, I will share a sneak peek into the next project that we're working on with our creative partnerships team. Next slide. In the next couple of years, JFK, as anyone who's flown out of there recently knows, is undergoing a lot of construction, and will have a number of new, incredibly renovated and brand new terminals. And so Public Art Fund is thrilled to be working with JFK Millennium Partners and the Port Authority on Terminal 6, which, next slide, in 2026 will bring 19 new permanent commissions to life. And so just as a sneak peek here, please stay tuned on our website, our social media channels, and as was shared earlier, also on Bloomberg Connects, with Public Art Fund's new projects coming up across the city in the coming months and years. And with that, thank you so much. And I will pass back to Amy.
Thank you guys so much. That was so amazing. Pretty much anywhere you look at Penn Station, you'll see art, which is so necessary. As someone who's soon braving Penn Station in a couple of weeks for Thanksgiving, having all of this wonderful context will make the visit feel a little less hectic. So I mentioned at the beginning of the program, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We have a few already. And the first one I'm going to direct at Cheryl, but then have the other two representatives weigh in as well. Someone asked how MT Arts and Design chooses which stations or locations get permanent artworks, or I would say just artworks in general. Is there a priority list? So Cheryl, you want to take that, and then I'll.
Yeah, I'm happy to. That's a fantastic question, and something I probably should have worked into the presentation. But MT Arts and Design operates as a percent for art program, which means that the MT has a policy mandate. Then whenever capital funds are being expended on station rehabilitation or the construction of a new station, which we've had a few examples of that in recent years, a certain portion of those funds are allocated for art to be part of the project. So we're only ever commissioning new artworks for stations that are receiving other improvements, that are being rehabilitated in other ways. So we already have a contractor who's on site, who's mobilized to support the installation process. There are already things that are happening that might require, you know, platforms to be closed or things like that. So there's no inconvenience to riders. And we have a very big system. We have 472 subway stations and about 250 commuter railroad stations. As I mentioned, we have 400 projects and some stations that have multiple artworks. But in time, we're slowly but surely getting to all of them. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, Sharon, I'll ask you too. So art on Amtrak. I mean, other than focusing on Amtrak sites, what places in Amtrak do you prioritize for either permanent or rotating exhibits?
Yes, I mean, I would say it really has to do with demand and also opportunity and sort of what life cycle each location is in. As I mentioned, it's really something, this particular program with the vinyl that we're putting up on surfaces at Penn Station and other stations is really something as an interim improvement. But we also do have permanent installations in our New York Met Lounge at Moynihan Train Hall and also now in the Washington Union Station Metropolitan Lounge. But I think we're really working with other capital projects at other stations to sort of find different spaces that work for the art. And I would also say that, I've also just been playing a role here too, just as sort of a point of contact with other arts and community groups who are looking to do something within our stations or adjacent to our stations and need access and such. So, the establishment of the program has really helped, I think, to forge certain community partnerships that are really important to Amtrak.
Okay, great. And Melanie, I know the Public Art Fund's purview is a little bit wider, but I mean, all three programs, it's kind of amazing listening to these programs, like even thinking about columns and kind of the margins of spaces are become places for artwork. But Melanie, how does Public Art Fund prioritize locations and maybe how Penn Station got into that mix? You explained that a little bit, but to go over again.
Yeah, it's a great question. So we have a number of different branches of our work. We have a number of temporary rotating programs, as well as these collaborations that happen and partnerships that happen to be able to realize these permanent large scale artworks. And so Public Art Fund, in terms of our rotating program, we have consistent programming. Come visit us at Doris Friedman Plaza, which was named for our founder, which is at the southeast corner of Central Park, one of the most popular entrances to the park at 59th Street and 5th Avenue. We have an artwork there with an incredible artist named Edra Soto right now on view through August of next year. We also program consistently at City Hall Park. Last weekend to see Chinook Bahanska Luger's piece there right now, and then also in Brooklyn Bridge Park, where right now we have an exhibition by Huma Baba that I highly recommend stopping by to see on view through March of next year. We also have an ongoing partnership with a great supporter named JC Deco, which enables us to realize 2 exhibitions every year on bus shelters across New York, Chicago, and Boston. In terms of these larger scale creative partnerships, they come through a number of different relationships and partnerships where we are invited to come and work with a partner and realize these incredible art programs. And so this one for Moynihan was through an invitation from Empire State Development to consult on and work on and install these artworks. But we are ever expanding. We've had projects that are on boats in the middle of the Hudson River, that are on the top of the Columbus statue or around the top of the Columbus statue in Columbus Circle. We have some projects, stay tuned for next year, that will be in new sites all across the city. So we're really always looking for ways to invite connection with and engage with folks all across New York City and beyond.
Yeah, I was a part of that. An artist installed a living room around Christopher Columbus statue in Columbus Circle. It was wild. It was awesome.
Amazing.
A little off topic, but so another question that someone asked about Penn Station in particular, but I might say just for your programs generally, is there kind of relates to your submission and commission process. Is there any open call anytime in the future, or how could someone who might be interested in submitting something submit something? And I'll start with Cheryl.
Sure. Thank you. Another fantastic question. So through our website, we have a link to a submittable portal, which gives artists an opportunity to create a profile and upload slide examples of their work that can be swapped out. Information can be updated at the convenience of the artist. So whenever we have an open call, we do advertise that opportunity, and using Submittable, you can express that you're particularly interested in that opportunity, but it also sort of serves as a pool for us that we're constantly looking through to get to know artists who are interested in working with the program. That Submittable is used primarily for our permanent art program, but I should mention that Arts and Design does also have a number of other what we call temporary programs, which just means that they're not permanent, a designation that I think has more to do with where the funding comes from, kind of going back to that last question. So we have a digital arts program, the graphics program that does the posters and car cards that you see, poetry in motion, the photos that are in the photo light boxes at 5 stations, as well as the performing arts arm is the Music Under New York program. So all of the musicians that are performing under the Pink Music Under New York banners. And so artists can also express their interest in being part of those opportunities through Submittable. Whenever we have an open call, we do post it on social media. So again, I hope you took a screen grab of the slide I shared before, but if not, it's easy to find all that information through our website, which is just mta.info/art.
Yes, I shared that earlier, but we can share it again too at the end of the program. So Sharon, I'll ask you, how do artists typically be selected for your program, or how could an interested artist become involved?
Well, at Art at Amtrak, we work with a curator, Deborah Simon, as I mentioned before, and also art advisory committees local to each station. We've been very busy just keeping up with the expansion of the program, but are looking to see how the program evolves in the future. So there may potentially be open calls in the future. At this point, it's sort of TBD, and hoping potentially to explore artist in residence opportunities as well.
Yeah, and Melanie?
It's always a great question. So we also have a curated program, as is Sharon's. We have a team of 4 curators who work on all of our different projects, as was the case with Moynihan and a number of our other creative partnerships projects. There is a selection committee, and so what happens is our team will present a long list of artists that we suggest for a project, and then there's a proposal process that we go through alongside that selection committee, made up of representatives from various partners as well as ourselves. And in terms of getting involved, we are always looking for new artists. We are working with artists ranging from some of the most renowned in the world to artists who are also emerging. Our team is as diligent as possible about seeing shows across New York City, visiting residencies, and traveling to see the most important art happening in the world. So if you see us out and about, feel free to say hi. And we're excited for everyone to keep in touch around our programs.
Okay, great. And Melanie, so we have time for one more question, and there's one question left, a specific question about the Elm Green and Drag Set Cityscape. Do you know, so how is it installed, cleaned, how heavy it is? Is it internally lit? Does the lighting stay on 24/7? I think just the logistics of that piece is what we're getting at here.
I'm so impressed by the diligence of this question also. And these are all of the first, I of course ask the questions about the artist, but these are the questions that I ask. Okay, I've got the answers. It was installed in components, and a shout out to my colleague Larry, who is also giving me an assist from behind the scenes. It was installed in components, each building raised into position and affixed individually. It's internally lit and the lights remain on 24/7. It's cleaned via a scissor lift, and the weight, I am very impressed to learn, is 30,000 pounds. And so again, this goes back to the entire village of people that it takes to bring one of these projects to life.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, that even though it's a specific question, it really just speaks to the really unique challenges of installing art in public spaces, especially spaces where millions of people travel through constantly. So I can appreciate just how moving mountains it is to have all the art that you've talked about today in each of your presentations in Penn Station. And it's something that I love and appreciate. So I wanted to thank you all of you for your time and your great presentations and for sharing them with our audience. And I really wanted to thank our audience for joining today as well. Again, I'm going to put a few links into the chat for more information about how to visit our spaces, if you enjoyed today's virtual program and want to help support future ones, please consider donating or becoming a member. And that last link is a link to our program page with upcoming programs. So we hope to see you then. Thank you so much, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Thank you, Amy, Sharon, Cheryl, and everyone who joined. Great to see everyone.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thanks so much.
Take care.